Hello, welcome to another episode of Film Club. I'm Chris Garner, joined with my co-host Tate in the Hour, and on today's show we'll be reviewing the 2011 biographical sports drama film, directed by Bennett Miller, starring Brad Pitt, Jonah Hill and Philip Seymour Hoffman. For those of you new to the channel, Film Club is our midweek show, and how it works is at the end of our main show, each week we take it in turns, nominating a film that vaguely ties in with whatever we reviewed in our main show. So, for our main show last time, I believe it was our Hunger Games.
No, Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs, it was indeed. I'm behind the times. Yes, it was Steve Jobs, and it was your pick, Tate. So,
yes, it was.
Run through a few reasons, or one reason why you chose this film in particular.
Aaron Sorkin. I mean, his writing is brilliant. I knew that Moneyball was a biographical film, so I thought, do you know what? I haven't seen it. It's a sports film. I'm a sporty kind of guy. So why don't we watch it?
Yeah, and he co-wrote this one with Steven Zaillian. I'm just checking his credits now. He worked on the first Mission Impossible film, Hannibal. Very, very different kinds of movies to what Aaron Sorkin has written. But I still think that there were ingredients of Aaron Sorkin's sort of style in this film in particular as well. Not so much as like Social Network or Steve Jobs or West Wing, but it was definitely still there.
Yeah.
So before we sort of get into the main nitty-gritty of the review, I guess we can sort of talk about our thoughts before going into it, and films like this in general, really. I'd heard of this film just based on like the title alone, and I didn't hear anything about it. I didn't know who was in it, what it was about, or anything like that. So Moneyball, and then you chose it, and then I remembered back to the title, thinking, oh yeah, I remember that film totally. And then I think you mentioned at the end of the Steve Jobs review that it's a sports movie, and I went, oh, okay. I'm gonna go on record now. I am not a fan of sports, like in general. Really, I love boxing, and that's honestly about as far as I go with sports. So obviously, I love the Rocky movies and stuff like that. But with films like this, and especially when they're talking like really like highbrow sports lingo and terms and terminology, things like that, it did get to the stage where I was sort of watching Moneyball, and like 80% of it seemed like it was in an alien language to me, and I was just sort of like nodding and just going along with it. So yeah, when you said it was a sports movie, I was like, oh okay, I'll give it a shot. And if I'm going to give sort of like a brief rundown before we get into it now, it's not a bad movie. It's got great performances. I think it's literally just down to the fact it's not my kind of movie. But I know you, on the other hand, are a huge sports fan.
I'm a massive sports fan.
Give us some of your thoughts before going into this one, because I think I think this is probably going to be our biggest like debated review we probably had on the channel so far.
So I actually, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of sports films, but I am a huge fan of sport. It's something that I just feel like most sports films just don't get it right. I'm not a fan of the Rocky films because I don't think they were done right, and I know I'm going to get a lot of hate from people for that who watch sports films. But it just, I don't know. It was something about the film that I didn't like. And yeah, I can't really name any sports films that I've done which weren't like perfect to me. I mean, probably my favourite sports film, I'm going to go on record here and just say beforehand, it's a comedy, it's Dodgeball. Happy Gilmore as well, just because they take a satirical look on sports. Sports are always seen as very serious, competitive and stuff like that. So if you're trying to dramatise it, it's got to be serious, it's got to be competitive. But you can have like comedy in there just to break up the tension. And I don't think anyone's really kind of done that with sports films too well, because usually with sports there aren't really too many situations that allow you to do that. Remember the Titans and The Blind Side are two very good films about sports. However, there are still parts of them which it wasn't a true sports film. And I know this isn't like all about the sport itself, it's more about kind of the tactical play done by Brad Pitt's character and Jonah Hill's character, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's character kind of going against that and trying as hard as he can to use his own tactics. But sports films in general, I've never really connected with truly. There hasn't been one that has truly stood out and I've gone, yes, that is a brilliant film. That is a brilliant sports film. That can be like one of the best films of all time or anything like that. Before going into this, I knew it was definitely a baseball film. I'm aware of baseball positions and I'm aware of baseball lingo and the dialogue that goes with baseball, so I understood almost all of the film. There was a couple of scenes where I was like, okay, let me just research that up. But yeah, going into it, I was expecting it to be more baseball than dramatic, but this was more dramatic than baseball.
Yeah, it sounds like I needed you here as an interpreter for this film, then, if you understood all this movie. If I'm just going to go back to sports movies really quickly, I'd be really hard pressed to think of like 10 titles in like a top 10 sports films of all time. One, mostly down to I haven't really seen that many, and two, most just don't connect with me. As I said, I love the Rocky films.
I'm going to see what Google
really
says.
Really looking forward to Creed, stuff like that. I love Warrior as well with Tom Hardy, which we've got a review for that up on the channel. I think that was one of our earliest reviews.
I'm an idiot. Raging Bull. There you go. One sports film that I can totally agree with is one of the best films.
Yeah, and one I watched recently, another baseball one, was Field of Dreams. Now, Field of Dreams I don't think I have as big a connection to than most people, especially obviously if you're a hardcore baseball fan. It's going to really hit home because it sort of highlights about the sport and its history and why it means so much to people. For someone who doesn't like sports, I just sort of watched that and I enjoyed the emotional journey of it, with like Kevin Costner and like his dad and everything like that. But this one, as you said, it is pretty much the politics behind the sport. And I know you in particular, you love like sort of analytics and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. I'd never really looked into that side of things before, because most sports films tend to be about the actual sport itself rather than all the behind the scenes stuff with it. So if you want to talk a bit about that, and was that what you were expecting, that it was going to be like that? Did you get a kick from that? Was that something you enjoyed from it?
So the analytics side of the film I quite liked. I mean, I'd heard of the book before the film actually came out, because I was kind of into my sports and analysis and stuff like that. Baseball wasn't really a sport that I followed back then, but I've got my Oakland A's cap here on my desk. In fact, I'm putting it on right now over the top of my headset whilst reviewing this film, because this film is about the Oakland A's. It's about the analytics specialist being brought into the team by Brad Pitt's character, just so that like maybe they could try a different tactic to try and win, because they were a bum team. They were at the bottom of the league. They were one of the worst teams because they were the poorest team. Because of that, it meant that they couldn't buy the players they wanted. Sure, they could get first draft pick, but usually they would sell their first draft pick for money. Just for anyone who doesn't watch sports, basically, at the end of every season, the team that comes last gets the first choice of the people who come through college or university, people going into pro sports, just because it means that when they are, in a couple of years' time, when they're ready to take over, and become, really, really good, get into their career, that team that's at the bottom suddenly becomes on top, and it continues rotating so that all the teams get an equal chance of winning trophies. That's the draft system. This team was always at the bottom, and they used to sell off their first pick just for the money, just so they could keep the team alive, going. And this film is about them buying low-budget players and adding in new tactics to win games, and whether they succeeded or not.
But one thing I do love about sports movies, and just movies in general, really, I love a good underdog story.
Yes.
I'm looking at my DVD shelf now. Karate Kid. What's the Teen Wolf as well. I think my picks tend to be a little bit more cheesy and almost entirely exclusively from the 80s. But I mean, you've sort of got the same thing going on here. I love the whole thing about. They bring up the list of players with Jonah Hill. He's sort of the man behind it all, who lays all the players out, says who he thinks are best. And it's people who maybe they're not handsome enough to be on camera or be part of a popular team. Maybe they haven't got the image down for it. But he sort of looks at it purely from a numbers perspective and says this person has bowled so many perfect shots, or I'm not even going to pretend to bring up the terminology and everything like that. So I'm probably getting it horrifically wrong right now. But you know what I mean, a person might have hit so many home runs or anything like that, but because they're either too old or they've got. There's one guy, I think it's. Oh God, what's his name? I forgot his name.
Stephen Bishop playing David Justice.
No, Jurassic World.
Oh, Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt, how did I forget that? Thank you for that. Yeah, Chris Pratt, like, he's got a condition where they say he bowls funny, like, he hasn't got the correct technique down, but yet he can still pull it off fine, and it's really with Brad Pitt's character and Jonah Hill that want to give these people the chance, and, I mean, you see that throughout the film. They're the underdogs, they're not great, some of them aren't even sort of, like, trained up in aspects of the sport, so they have to teach them, things like that. And then, by the end, they win.
Well,
sort
they
of.
kind of. It's a bittersweet ending, but we'll get to that in a bit. So, when I was watching this film, I was focusing on the baseball, I was focusing on the tactics and stuff like that, and I think it was very interesting, because the politics at the time was, you play your best players. You buy the most expensive players because they are the better players. And I know this politics is very heavily implied in football nowadays. The best players are always the most expensive ones. You pay the most for them because they're the ones most likely to get the results. In this film, he picks the ones that are just coming out of maybe in the 6th or 7th round of pickings from the draft. So they're not even near the top. They're not even the best players. They're maybe like the 100th, 200th best player. He's picking the old-timers who have had really good careers but are now dropping off. And he wants them to play for the team because they've got good batting records, they've got good pitching records. He even picks, in Chris Pratt's character, a guy who can't play first base, and he puts him on first base. He teaches him how to catch because he knows that he can do multiple areas of the field. And that's just kind of the film. That is just sports tactics, basic, like a new way of inventing one. With the old system, it was shunned, and people were, in the film towards the start, people are looking at this team very weirdly because they're not bringing out the results, they're not winning any games. In fact, they're losing almost every game because of Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, who I just need to quickly just kind of say what Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is. He plays the team coach. So Brad Pitt is the team manager, the general manager, who picks the players. Philip Seymour Hoffman decides where they go, what they do. And he is trying as hard as he can in this film to stop this tactic from working. He's putting the people who he brought in to pitch, to bat, just so that he can say, look, I'm in charge here, I'm the one who calls the shots, I'm the one who chooses what players go on the pitch and stuff like that. And they're losing because of it, and Brad Pitt's character is taking all the flack because he's gone with this off-the-wall tactic. And it's very interesting just to see kind of how that plays out and how the media kind of bends that. They don't really focus on that too much, but they did kind of hint at it very heavily with a couple of news broadcasts putting the blame completely on Tom Cruise's character. No, not Tom Cruise. Why did I say Tom Cruise? I got a picture of Tom Cruise up here for some strange reason. Brad Pitt's character, sorry. So it's very interesting just to see kind of how the film plays out.
Tom Cruise would have been amazing in this movie.
He would have done this movie as well, wouldn't he?
Yeah, oh yeah, totally.
I'm just giving you another idea for someone who should be cast.
But yeah, and like, it's not just Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's like the entire sort of like, I don't even know what you call them, like the sort of council, I guess, like of all the managers, and yeah, that's it. And honestly, they have some of my favourite scenes, like the bit where Brad Pitt sort of like hires Jonah Hill's character and brings him into the room, and and Jonah Hill's literally just more like a yes man, like he just sort of repeats everything that Brad Pitt tells him to on cue, and they're like saying, does he really need to be in here, and everything like that. That was one of my favourite scenes in the film. But as I say, like a good underdog story, everyone puts the team down, goes against the odds, and then they go on to success. And I really like Brad Pitt's character in this. I'm just looking here, it says that the film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Pitt, Supporting for Hill, and Best Picture as well. And I do honestly think, because we sort of looked at what other films were up for Academy Awards that year, and my God, that was a bad year.
Yeah.
Really, and I do think that Brad Pitt definitely deserved it because I would say it's one of his best performances. He's sort of his personality in the film. It does remind me a lot of how he appears in Inglourious Bastards a little bit, like the sort of like arrogance and like his mannerisms and stuff. Obviously, in Inglourious Bastards, it's a lot more sort of like a caricature and like really over the top. But
this is
I
believable.
definitely could, yeah, I could definitely see sort of like similarities between the two roles, and it's great. I mean, you see sort of his obsession with the sport itself, and just so I'm sure I got this right, the flashbacks were of him when he was growing up and he had the chance to be a player, right? I love that stuff, and I mean, you've got that stuff offset with his family life as well, and any other film would probably like really focus on the whole family side of it, but I think it's really subtly done where you pick up on it that he's, you know, broken up with his wife, and you know the daughter's like still try to like keep the relationship with him, and then that ultimately culminates in the very final shot of the film. And I thought that was really nice because it could have easily have just focused on one of those areas really, but I think that it balanced it incredibly well for his character, and I think that the backstory of him worked really well, and I think the placements of those flashbacks really sort of helped lend to the film's sort of gravitas and the more poignant moments of the film.
Yeah, the flashbacks really did help in the film, just kind of fleshing out the film, telling you what actually happened to Billy Bean, the Brad Pitt's character, when he was a baseball player. Because the character who ends up being the general manager was a baseball player beforehand. He was the first pick for the Mets, who were a huge team, massive, and he, as a career, tanked. He did not play as the scouts predicted, he did not have a good batting career, and he was dropped down to the B team, then the C team, then the D team, and then he retired. And at the very start of the film, he was given the choice between Harvard or Stanford University,
Stanford, I think.
Very high prestigious university,
yeah,
whether to go into his academic studies or become a millionaire basically in the baseball game if he was successful. And he chose baseball purely because he got the first pick. And there's a scene halfway through the movie where Jonah Hill's character, when they're first being introduced to him, Brad Pitt asks him one honest question and says, where would you have picked me in that draft? Would I have been the first pick? And he says he would have picked him in the 9th or so round, which is really far down the pick, and that's purely based on his statistics. So it's very interesting to see, and that's why he hires him, because he's honest. Jonah Hill's character, he's honest, calculating, and you can see a drive in Jonah Hill's character as well. I think it's a very good performance by him. It's one of the best ones. In fact, the person who he actually played in real life, Peter Brand, said he loved Jonah Hill playing his character, but he didn't like the writing that went with it in the film. But the way that Jonah Hill pulled it off, he said, was very good, and he quite enjoyed it. The only other character that we can really mention is Philip Seymour Hoffman's character of the manager, who I would say he wasn't too much in the film, but his impact was definitely felt.
Yeah, definitely, and I mean, you look at Philip Seymour Hoffman in all of his films, and he always brings something different to every character. I mean, he can do comedy. If anyone's seen Along Came Polly, he's my favourite aspect of that film. I think he's brilliant. And then you see him in something like Mission Impossible 3, where he plays an incredible bad guy. And then you see him in a film like this, and it's just something completely different each time. And I mean, he was such an amazing talent, and you see that in this film. And going back to Jonah Hill for a second as well, he was always sort of that comedy guy, wasn't he? And that was never my sort of comedy when he was into that. Now he's moved into sort of more serious roles, albeit sometimes with a comedic edge still to it. I think his career has just absolutely just accelerated, and my favourite performance of his is in Wolf of Wall Street. That was the first serious role I think I saw him in, and then he got a cameo in Django Unchained as well. And then you go back and watch this, so you can sort of see that. I don't know if it was around this time or if this was one of his first.
I think this may have been his first serious role.
Yeah, but I mean, even Channing Tatum now's breaking into more serious roles as well, isn't he? I mean, he does have the comedy ones with obviously Jonah Hill in 22 Jump Street, but he's also had the Foxcatcher, which was the next film that was directed by the guy who did this, Moneyball. Similar sort of film, I think. I think that's to do with a biographical film about wrestling. I think that one is, isn't it? And like working way to the top. So sort of similar concept. But no, I thought Jonah Hill was brilliant in this film. One of my favourite characters. One thing I want to talk about Brad Pitt, and before we move on to the next section, is I love that every time when he walked onto the pitch, you could see it where it was the regret and the longing of when he wanted to really play. And like every time he'd like sit in the chair and he'd just sort of like be staring straight ahead, like in deep thought. I thought that was brilliant, and that was sort of throughout the film as well. And then I think he found acceptance with it towards the end,
where he was just laying on the pitch, just kind of staring up at the sky.
Yeah, or maybe he thought with the victory of his team that he shared in that victory, and that was sort of the moment he was always longing for. But yeah, I thought all the performances in this film were great. I know you want to talk a bit about the cinematography, if you want to sort of touch on that a bit now.
Scenes where I like the fact that they actually went on set to the different baseball stadiums. That's something that I really liked. They actually filmed most of it in Oakland dressing room. They actually went to the Oakland dressing room and filmed some of it. They filmed it in the Oakland pitch for some of it. They used all the baseball actually on the field scenes in a training ground, however. But in the end of the film, they did actually go to the Red Sox stadium. They did go to all these different places just to film this film. Not only that, but I quite liked some of the scenes where I think there was just talking narration in the background, and they had the lonely baseball pitcher just kind of pitching in multiple different ways with like a black smoky background. I feel like that was really well done. I'm not sure whether it was needed in the movie or not, but I kind of like the addition of it.
Well, I'm just checking here. Wally Pfister did the cinematography. I didn't realise that until now. He's obviously the guy who's worked on near enough all of Christopher Nolan's films. Yeah. He directed Transcendence, which I know didn't get great reviews, but no. So it's interesting, like when you say like he filmed like the stadium stuff, and then his very next film would be The Dark Knight Rises, which also filmed in a stadium that time, American football. But no, he is a phenomenal cinematographer, and the camera work in this was great. Really, the only other things we can touch on, really, I think this will be a shorter review than some of our other ones, is really the ending. So
the spoilers in the ending.
The spoilers.
First off, the film isn't just about Moneyball and the tactics they went with, because after losing for half the season, Brad Pitt basically gives Philip Seymour Hoffman an ultimatum. He basically cuts all of his players that Philip Seymour Hoffman was playing, and says, here are the players that you have to play with. These are the ones I wanted you to play with at the start. And it's a very brutal scene where he's just kind of going around telling people, you've been transferred to, like, I think he was saying, you've been transferred to Carolina, you've been transferred to Pittsburgh. And they're just kind of like sat there thinking, oh, okay, we've just been let go like that. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's got that scene where he's just got his head in his hands, where all of his, or what he thinks is his star players, are just leaving, and he's left with the ones that he never wanted to play in the first place. After that, however, Philip Seymour Hoffman changes his tactics to fit Brad Pitt's ones that he wanted, and they go on to do the greatest baseball winning streak of all time.
Yeah, and with the ending as well, where he gets offered the contract at the very end, and Brad Pitt has to make that decision. I can't even imagine being in that situation to make that call. But I think we get a text crawl at the end, don't we, to sort of like highlight what happened after that. And man, I don't know if he would have been kicking himself after that. I'm sure he probably did. So. But
basically, in that situation, he was contacted by the Boston Red Sox. They went to Fenway Park, and he spoke to the manager there, and they said they'd give him the job. 12.5 million salary would have made him the highest paid manager in sport history for any sport, and he refused it because he wanted to stay with the Oakland Athletics, the underdog team, the small team, and continue working his tactics. And then 2 years later, Red Sox won the World Series using the same model as he'd created. So that may have pissed him off slightly, but to be honest, I don't think he cared at that point. He was more in it for the game instead of the money.
Yeah, and you get the sense that, he'll still stay true to his team and also to his family at the end as well. Like, you see him when he's just driving down the highway, and then I think that's the very last
Yeah.
shot of the film, if I remember rightly. I guess before we sort of close out, we can sort of highlight any of our favourite scenes. If I go first on this one,
Go
because
for
I'm
it.
trying to think of a particular favourite scene. One of my favourites is where they've lost the game and they're all still sort of like partying and horsing around, and Brad Pitt walks in, and I don't know if it's Chris Pratt who says it. He says he's like dancing, having fun, saying like, "This is what losing feels like." And then Brad Pitt just like picks up a baseball bat, smacks like the music box they're listening to, the boom box, and said, "That's what losing feels like." And it's just sort of this awkward silence where they just take in their failure in the game. That I
Yeah.
thought was brilliantly done. And then it's just sort of what I said earlier, like the bit where Brad Pitt's laying out his plan. You've got all the naysayers in the board of governors. Jonah Hill's just there like chiming in every now and then when Brad Pitt points his finger at him. I thought that was pretty funny. Probably some of the best writing, I would say, throughout the film. I guess that's probably it.
Yeah.
If you want to go through some of your
My
favourites.
favourite scene, I have to say that I quite like the scenes where in the film the character of Billy Bean or the general manager or Brad Pitt doesn't watch any of the games when they go on their 20-game winning streak.
Yes.
I thought that was very interesting because I quite like that as a character trait. He thought of it as kind of like a bad luck charm if he did go in and see the matches, so he avoided them. And in the final match, he walks in and they start losing. They lose an 11-point lead. Now, you have no idea how bad that is, losing an 11-point lead. That is like losing an 11-goal lead in soccer or football, what we call football in Britain. That's like being 50-0 down or 50-0 up in American football and then losing it in one quarter. That's what it was
Jesus.
like.
Yeah, because
I'm giving worldwide examples here, but like
yeah.
that the disappointment on his face because he was thinking all this time, oh okay, there is this kind of hex on me and stuff like that. He finally decides because his daughter says, "You're not gonna curse it. You're not gonna like ruin it." He goes to the game and it suddenly gets ruined. He goes back to the dressing room, sticks on the radio with his head in his hands. I thought that was a brilliant scene. But my outright favourite scene was when he was with Jonah Hill on the phone and they were player bartering.
Yeah.
They are sat on the phone. They're trying to get some new players into their team. So they're basically playing with the players. They are on the phone to all these different clubs saying, "Hey, we can give you this player for this amount of money if you throw in this player." And then they do like 5 or 6 trades in about 2-3 minutes. And they managed to get so much money out of it and the players that they wanted. And it's so brilliantly done because he's holding people on the line. He's calling up different teams. He's tactically giving his players away to another team so that they don't buy a player from another team. I think that was really well done. That was brilliantly shot, brilliantly played with all the different things. I didn't see many cuts in the takes in that one. It looked like it was done in maybe one or two long strips of uncut tape, but it was brilliant.
Is that the scene where Jonah Hill does that amazing reaction when they get the player they want or the money they want?
Yeah.
I can't remember what it is, and he like just sort of like grabs the air and he's like yes when he gets it, and then he just puts the phone down and they celebrate. Yeah, that was a great scene. So finally, recommendation. Would you recommend Moneyball?
If you're a sports fan, especially if you're a baseball fan, if you're a baseball fan, you have to watch it. It's simple as that. If you're a sports fan in general, it's interesting to watch. You may find the second half of the film more entertaining because it's more focused on the baseball instead of the politics of the game. If you're a fan of cinema in general and you're kind of not sure about sport, then I wouldn't. It is a sports film at heart, and it does take in a lot of sports terminology, a lot of sports politics. So if that isn't your thing, then I wouldn't recommend watching it. But hey, I enjoyed it, so yeah.
Yeah, I will sort of echo with you. I mean, this isn't probably a film I'll ever go back and watch again. As I said, this isn't my kind of movie. Especially the sports movies that are sort of this in-depth and sort of like... what's the word? Like sophisticated in like the language they use. Because I mean, this film doesn't really like hold a newcomer's hand and like explain everything outright, like with exposition and everything like that. It's pretty much like you go into that, you need to know your terminology.
Yeah.
You need to do some sports homework before seeing this movie. As a film itself, you know, you can't fault it. It's got great performances. It's well directed, well shot, everything like that. But if you're not into sports, as you just said, if you're not sort of like privy to all of the lingo and everything that goes on with it, you are going to be lost, and you may find it. You might even find it a bit boring. Actually, like there were parts where I was sort of zoning out of it purely because it was like an alien language to me. I didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're sort of going back, you're watching some of the old Oscar nominees, definitely go for it. You might be surprised. If you're a lover of film, watch it. But if you're sort of like a casual fan and you see, oh, it's a sports movie, let's watch this, you might want to try and find something a bit more entertaining maybe, or a bit more sort of like simplistic. Like go for like Field of Dreams or something, which is a bit more of a personal story with, you know, sport as the background, sort of like the arc of the film. But yeah, I think that will do it for this week's Film Club. So be sure to rate, like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think of Moneyball if you've seen it. You can find us at Facebook at facebook.com/cinemasavvy. We're on Twitter at cinema_savvy, and we're also at Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy. So next main show review, which we should be recording maybe right after this, is our review of Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. We've got a lot to say on that, so be sure to look out for that one, and until then, thanks for listening.